Our families can say and do the darndest things. I know when I was first thrust into some sort of bigger public sphere, I realized a lot of the things that my family did were not universal to what some of my other friends' families did. Whew. And it's not really that these things like made me feel more self-conscious about myself and my family. It just made me realize the differences and like the special things that we had compared to what my friends had. And so today we are going to go over a few of those things that I think were particularly unique to the Reckling family growing up. One of the things that I remember back from when I was really, really little is that we would always go to Walmart every 2 weeks. That was like our grocery shopping trip. And when we got home, after we were done unloading all the groceries, we would put them like in our kitchen, and then we would take them all out of the bags, then put them away in their like proper places. I remember my mom like always taking out the receipt or whatever and asking everybody how much they thought we ended up spending. And whoever was the closest won. Not that they like won anything. They just get a nice pat on the back. Although there was one time where I'm just like, if you win the guessing game like 3 times in a row, you should get something, because I had 2 and I was pretty darn sure I was going to get it the 3rd time. But then my brother won it. And even though I thought this was just like only a Reckling thing, I found out a lot later that almost every family has a plastic bag full of other plastic bags. I thought that was just something unique that my mom Jerry had come up with, but no. And I guess since Christmas was around the corner, we can talk about a few of our actual Christmas traditions. We always used to open like the gifts we got for each other on Christmas Eve, like before or after we went to church for our church's Christmas Eve service. And that was like always really nice, because it was good to like release that tension and just that curiosity of wanting to know what we each got for each other. But the gifts that we got for each other, we opened on Christmas Eve, and then the gifts that Santa brought us, we would open on actual Christmas Day in the morning. And then we would travel out to our grandparents' house, who lived about an hour and a half away, and we would just spend Christmas Day with them. My grandparents had this weird tradition of always giving us this like tin of popcorn that I always really, really liked, and would always devour before the new year even started, because I had nothing to do since it was just Christmas break. And my parents always used to buy me and my brother the lifesaver like storybook things. It was like all these lifesavers in a big box, and it had like a flap on it that had like a little story inside. But speaking of reading, my parents used to love to read to us as kids. And it's not like they read us like anything like particularly like groundbreaking or anything that was like particular literary relevance of the time. They were pretty traditional when it came to reading us bedtime stories. One of the favorites that we absolutely loved was Thomas the Tank Engine. My brother and I were obsessed with Thomas for God knows how long. And my parents got us this like big treasury of like all of the original stories, and my parents would read them to us until like the binding wore out. But that was more or less from my brother and I just like opening it up and using our own imaginations from the pictures to tell the stories. But Thomas was like such like a huge presence in our house. Every once in a while when we were having a lazy day, my brother and I would take out all of like the wooden tracks and trains that we had and like build an entire like rail system all throughout our house. It was a bitch to dismantle, but we loved building it and then playing on it, and our dad would get in on it too. And eventually that blossomed into like low scale actual model railroading, but it never got beyond like a simple circuit with like a switch and a siding. My parents always used to take us out driving whenever we couldn't fall asleep. And this was usually a more popular thing to do in the winter. They would drive us around to see all the Christmas lights. And our mom says that whenever my brother and I saw Christmas lights from the car, we would always point outside and we'd go, "Pretty lights, mommy, pretty lights," and then be out like that. I would usually fall asleep before my brother did, because he would probably fall asleep within like the last mile of them getting home. My mom also says that whenever I was little and we were going a place that I didn't want to go, I would always just put my hands in my lap and look out the car window. And I always notice myself doing this to this day, but I think it's more just a habit more so. But it might be some sort of Pavlovian response to being with people or going somewhere that I don't want to go. I don't know. My parents, since we lived on a farm, they also had us do 4-H for a number of years. And for those of you who do not know, 4-H is this like agricultural, team building, social club, 4-H clubs, where you can do like a number of projects. The 4-H club that I was in was they liked us to show livestock, and that was like cows, sheep, or pigs. You could also show chickens. We weren't a big horse club, but you could show horses if you wanted. But that was a big that was like the big summer tradition for us for at least 10 years. And we sank God knows how much money into like buying cows and like all of the supplies. It's kind of like rather cultish. Like the more like you put into it, the more you're supposed to reap from it. But it's weird because the people at the top always stay at the top and the people at the bottom just normally stay at the bottom, and there's not much mixing. But basically throughout the summer you have to work with your animal, whether that be a cow, sheep, or pig. And it's more or less, it's an exercise in building trust between you and your animal and seeing how much the two of you can cooperate for county fair time at the end of the summer. And so you're supposed to like cut their hair, make them look as nice as they can, as fluffy as they can, in order to like win best in show. And so like this involves shears, putting them on this like in this like rack thing, and then like blow drying them to make them look as fluffy as possible. And there's like this conditioner and this hairspray. There's a lot that goes into it. It's basically like a beauty pageant for cattle. And it's actually really fun to like bond with an animal like throughout the summer or whatever, even though they can be frustrating. Like sometimes they just don't want to walk, or they will just lie down because they're just done for the day and there's nothing much that you can do other than try to prod them and poke them to go back up. And eventually we stopped doing it my sophomore year of high school because I had this sudden realization that this kind of like wasn't right. Like as much trust as you could gain from an animal, it didn't sit right with me, considering like some of the behaviors that I sometimes saw at the county fairs could have been classified as like borderline animal abuse. And even though my parents had like sunk so much money into this endeavor, they let me stop, and we just kept as many cows as we had until we like butchered them all for meat, because that's just how it goes in the farm. Sorry for all you animal purists out there. We also used to have this family tradition. We don't have it much anymore. My dad's side of the family, usually for like Christmas or like 4th of July, any kind of like fun national holiday, we would all meet in Crete, Nebraska, or Wilbur, Nebraska, depending on who was hosting that year, and meet up at a VFW. And so I have this weird morbid fondness for the inside of VFWs. And VFWs, it stands for Veterans of Foreign Wars, and they are like these meeting halls for the VFWs or anybody who wants to rent them out. And they're basically like a social hall, and they have pools, they have a bar, and they just have like fun like war memorabilia. It's a place where you can like gather with your family or like drink yourself into happiness. And both of those happened at my family reunions. And it was usually at like these VFWs where I would see like alcohol. That being in a VFW is my first recollection of like seeing somebody drinking alcohol, because my parents never did. And if they did, they kept it pretty under wraps from us, because I don't remember there ever being alcohol in our house. There was a weird period of time where we had this tradition. It was probably like 2 or 3 years where we watched the animation Domination block on Fox. Me and my brother were like going through like our teenage like angsty like everything morbid is funny phase, and so like Family Guy and American Dad really like fit the bill. And all throughout high school we had this tradition of having like a one-act competition or some sort of one-act performance for theater on our birthday. And so that would be kind of like a big deal for my parents, because they like to watch us perform. They still like to watch me perform. For about 4 or 5 years, we had this thing on Sundays. We would call them like our mega Sundays or whatever. And so it would start with church, and then Sunday school, and then we would have like our fellowship at our church. Then we would have to rush over to a neighboring town to go do this thing called Awana. We'll put a pin in that. We'll be back to that. And then we would have to go to a 4-H meeting, and that would probably end by like 9-ish, 9:30, then have a fellowship after our 4-H meeting, and then go home. And so back to this Awana thing. Awana was this religious group thing. It stands for Approved Workmen Are Not Ashamed, from
a book in the Bible. It's a Bible verse.
when I was a religious purist, I used to know. I don't know anymore because I don't care. But like you get this book and it comes with like all of these like lessons. Sometimes they tell a story and they usually have a Bible verse that go along with them. You have to memorize the verse in order for your leader to sign off on it so you can go to the next one. And so it's like this reward system so you can like practice it at home and come with like all of these verses in your head ready to like memorize and go boom boom boom. And you also got prizes before like awards time at the end, and they would announce like people who were like going from one book to the next book, or like finishing like the entire series and moving up to like the next level. And there were like 4 different levels or something. They also had like these like Olympic game type things. Each like Awana meeting was set up into like the study time and then like the active physical time. And like the physical time was set aside for like basically like training like your Awana team to go and compete at the Awana games. And our Awana team probably only went once, and we were like really screwed over by this one kid who didn't do the number of laps they needed to do. But it's fine, I'm over it. But like that was like a weird part of my childhood that I sometimes look back on and think like, wow, that was the beginning of my brainwashing. But then like I decided to cut ties with every one of those people when in 2015 like gay marriage was legalized, and I said something about like, oh, I'm so happy gay marriage is legalized on Facebook. And they were all like, oh, Dustin, we used to think we knew you, and all of a sudden you've turned to like sin?
What?
And like all these people that I literally had not talked to for probably 5 years were condemning me to hell, and I'm like, okay, bye. And like even though that had been like a huge part of our life, like my mom and dad were like perfectly okay with me cutting ties with those people because I didn't need that kind of negativity. They knew it was like kind of affecting me. Parents are a lot smarter than we think they are. All in all though, I think like a lot of these traditions my parents had, they would usually keep up because they thought it was fun, or they thought it was fun for me and my brother. And so they did these things to make us happy, to build a stronger family unit, which with this hindsight, I see is very noble. At 22, I'm getting kind of nostalgic for like how things were 10-ish years ago, and it's just kind of like putting me in this really maudlin state. I went home the other day, and my room, the room that I used to film in, the green one, is no longer like that. They took all of my personal effects off the wall and like all of my sheets and everything. It's pretty much just a generic guest room now, and I just look back at it and I think this room is so small. I don't know how I lived there. I think once I'm at a stage where I have enough money to care for myself, I'm going to give my parents all that they want, because they gave me all that I wanted as a kid. Yeah. Alright, this is Dustin signing off, but only for now.